August 16, 1977. Just hours before his death, Elvis Presley picked up the phone and dialed a number no one expected. The voice that answered wasn't family. It wasn't a friend. What he said in that call, caught on a taped line, changed everything people thought they knew about the King's final hours. Once you know who answered, you'll never see Elvis's last night the same way again. Memphis, Tennessee. The air that night felt heavy, humid, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Inside Graceland, the clock ticked past 2 a.m., its soft chime echoing through the halls of a house too quiet for a man who once lived for noise. Elvis Presley paced the floor barefoot, a glass of water in one hand, a phone in the other. His bodyguard, Charlie Hodge, sat slumped on the couch, half asleep but watching him through tired eyes. The King had performed thousands of times before roaring crowds. But tonight, there were no lights, no applause, just the restless shuffle of a man haunted by memories he couldn't silence. On the table beside him sat a pile of scribbled notes. Song ideas, prayer verses, maybe both. One line was circled in blue ink, "Peace don't live in palaces." Elvis sighed, rubbed his temples, and stared at the old rotary phone. Its ivory handle glistened in the lamp's dim glow. He spun the dial once, then hung up before the first ring. Charlie stirred. "Who are you trying to reach, E?" Elvis smiled faintly. "Just ghosts, son. Nothing but ghosts." Outside, a low thunder rolled through the Memphis sky. Rain began to patter softly against the windows, the same rhythm as the gospel tunes he used to hum before shows. He reached for the phone again. The click of the dial echoed through the house. He let it ring twice, then froze, his thumb trembling above the receiver. He hung up again. Charlie frowned. "You all right?" Elvis didn't answer. He stared at the framed photo on the mantel, him and Priscilla, years younger, smiling under Vegas lights. Their laughter looked so easy then. He whispered, almost to himself, "You ever wonder if people remember you right?" Charlie shifted uncomfortably. "Everyone remembers you, E." "Yeah," Elvis muttered. "But do they remember me, or just the man they paid to see?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. He walked to the piano, ran his fingers along the keys but didn't play. The silence between the notes felt heavier than any song. Upstairs, Ginger Alden was asleep, unaware of the storm inside the man she loved. Elvis sat back down, gripping the phone again. "Maybe I'll call her," he said quietly. "Who?" Charlie asked. Elvis didn't reply. He just smiled, a tired, knowing smile, and started dialing. The numbers clicked, one after another, like the slow rhythm of a heartbeat. The phone rang once, twice, then a third time. No answer. He set it down gently. "Guess some voices ain't meant to come back." Charlie looked at him, confused, but Elvis had already stood up and walked toward the window. The rain was falling harder now, streaking the glass with thin silver lines. In the reflection, Elvis looked older than his 42 years. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed, but behind the exhaustion there was something else. Acceptance. He whispered, "I think I've been talking to the wrong people my whole life." Then, almost without thinking, he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a crumpled scrap of paper. A phone number, written in faded ink. No name, just 7 digits and the word Memphis scrawled beside it. He stared at it for a long time. Charlie noticed. "What's that?" Elvis folded the paper and tucked it back into his pocket. "Old number. Been meaning to make this call for years." He turned off the lamp. The room sank into darkness except for the faint red glow of the clock. 2:24 a.m. As thunder rumbled again, the first flash of lightning illuminated his face. He looked calm now, peaceful even. The house went quiet except for the ticking of the clock and the soft rain outside. Elvis walked out of the room and down the hall toward the phone in the kitchen. He picked it up, dialed slowly, listened, and this time someone answered. But it wasn't who anyone expected. The kitchen phone sat on the counter, its ivory handle worn smooth from years of late-night calls. Elvis stood over it, the cord wrapped around his fingers, staring at the 7 digits he'd just dialed. Ring, ring. Then silence. He waited, breath held, until the click of the line disconnecting broke the spell. He dialed again. This time, the call didn't even ring. Just a hollow buzz that sounded like the past trying to speak and failing. Charlie Hodge leaned against the doorway, his eyes heavy. Maybe you should try sleeping, man." Elvis shook his head. "I'll sleep soon enough." Charlie frowned. "You mean, not like that?" Elvis cut in quickly. "Just got things I should have said a long time ago." He reached for a small notepad on the counter. Names and numbers scattered across it. Some were smudged, others scratched out. Dr. Nick, Vernon, Priscilla. Then, at the bottom, a single name underlined twice. Rosetta Brown. A gospel singer. One he'd met years ago at a benefit concert in Nashville. She'd told him something that stuck with him. Something he'd never forgotten. "You don't need saving, Elvis," she'd said with that warm Tennessee drawl. "You just need to forgive yourself." He'd laughed it off back then. But tonight, those words felt like prophecy. He hovered his finger over the number beside her name. The ink had faded, but the digits were still clear enough. Charlie tried to lighten the moment. "Rosetta Brown? That the lady who outsang you on How Great Thou Art?" Elvis cracked a smile. "Only one who ever could." He looked back at the phone. Reckon she'd still answer after all these years? Before Charlie could reply, Elvis started dialing. The rain outside softened to a hush. The only sound now was the click and whirl of the rotary dial turning slowly. Ring, ring, then click. A voice on the other end. Soft, tired. "Hello." Elvis froze. It wasn't her. It was a man. "Rosetta's asleep," the voice said. "Who's calling?" Elvis hesitated. "Tell her." An old sinner said thank you. Before the man could ask more, Elvis hung up. Charlie stared at him. "That her husband?" Elvis nodded, eyes down. "Guess so." The room went quiet again. The clock on the wall ticked past 3 a.m. For a moment, Elvis looked lost in thought, his fingers tracing the phone cord, his expression soft. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "You ever notice how the Lord always puts the right people in your path, but you only realize it too late?" Charlie didn't know how to answer. Elvis smiled faintly. "I think he gave me one more shot to say what I needed to say." He turned and walked back into the living room, the shadows stretching long across the carpet. On the piano sat a small envelope he'd written earlier that day. Charlie caught a glimpse of the words on the front. "To whoever still believes I tried." Elvis sat at the piano bench and stared at it for a long time. He tapped one note soft, low, then another. The sound filled the room like a heartbeat. He whispered, "Maybe forgiveness sounds like music." Charlie shifted uneasily. You want me to call someone?" Elvis shook his head. "No. There's only one person left I need to talk to." He looked at the kitchen phone again, eyes fixed, calm now. A new number formed slowly in his mind, one he hadn't thought of in years. He reached for the phone again. The storm outside had stopped, leaving only silence. When the line connected, the voice that answered wasn't who anyone could have imagined. The line clicked once, then twice. Static whispered through the receiver. Elvis adjusted the cord against his shoulder and said softly, "Hello." For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then came a voice, low, warm, unsure. "Hello? Who's calling this late?" He froze. It wasn't Ginger. It wasn't Priscilla. It was a voice he hadn't heard in 3 years. "Sister Rosetta?" he said quietly. A pause. Then a gentle laugh, aged and disbelieving. "Lord, is that really you, Elvis Presley?" He smiled faintly, almost shy. "Yes, ma'am. It's me." She chuckled. "Well, I'll be. I thought you'd forgotten all about us little folks." He laughed softly, that familiar Memphis drawl slipping through. "Ain't forgot, sister. Just been lost a while." The sound of her laughter seemed to cut through the heavy night. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. Rosetta Brown had been a gospel singer since her teens. He'd first met her in 1974 at a benefit show in Nashville, where they'd shared a stage and a verse of peace in the valley. She was one of the few people who'd ever spoken to him without fear or fame in her eyes. He remembered how she'd grabbed his hand backstage after the show, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "You're trying to save everybody, but who's saving you?" Now, hearing her voice again, that memory felt like a prophecy. "Been meaning to call for years," he said softly. "Guess I finally ran out of excuses." Rosetta's tone softened. "You all right, baby?" Elvis sighed. "I don't rightly know. The body's tired. The soul's louder than ever." A long pause filled the line. You could hear the faint hum of her ceiling fan spinning somewhere far away. "Elvis, you sound like a man carrying too many ghosts," she said gently. He chuckled, though it sounded more like a sigh. "That's 'cause I am." Rosetta said, "You got folks who love you. Fans all over the world. Why you calling me?" He hesitated, choosing his words like stones on thin ice. "Because you ain't one of them." That stopped her. He continued, "You're the only one who ever talked to me like I was human. You told me I didn't need saving, just forgiving. Been thinking about that ever since." The line crackled with static, and for a moment, it felt like the world outside had gone still just to listen. Rosetta's voice softened. "I told you the truth, child. Ain't nobody too big to come home to grace." Elvis swallowed hard. "I been singing gospel on stage lately, hoping maybe God's listening this time." She smiled through her voice. "Oh, he's listening. Always was. Maybe he just wanted you to pick up the phone first." Elvis laughed quietly. It wasn't Showtime laughter, it was relief. "I reckon he did." She asked gently, "You alone tonight?" He looked around the darkened kitchen, at the untouched sandwich on the counter, the open Bible near the sink. "Yeah, but it ain't the first time. Lonely don't mean empty, baby," she said. "Sometimes it just means you're about to be filled with something better." He went quiet again. Outside, the rain had stopped. The crickets returned, their song faint but steady. "You know," he said slowly, "folks been writing stories about me for years. Some of it true, most of it not. But none of them ever ask what I was afraid of." Rosetta asked, "And what were you afraid of, Elvis?" He hesitated. The phone cord twisted around his hand. Then, barely above a whisper, "Being forgotten as a man." The words hung heavy. She didn't rush to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, full of kindness. "You won't be remembered for your fame, son. You'll be remembered for your fight." Elvis's voice trembled. "I sure hope so." Rosetta chuckled softly. "The world don't remember the king. The world remembers the heart inside him." He smiled, blinking away tears he hadn't realized were forming. "You got away with words, sister. And you got away with souls," she replied. The clock on the wall ticked past 3:23 a.m. Charlie had drifted off in the next room, unaware that a conversation was happening that would rewrite the story of Elvis's final night. Rosetta's voice grew softer. "You sound tired, baby." He nodded, though she couldn't see it. "I am." "Then you rest," she said. "But before you go, remember what I told you years ago. Don't let the noise drown the truth." Elvis's tone was almost peaceful. "Yes, ma'am. I won't." He paused, then whispered, "Thank you for picking up." Rosetta smiled into the phone. "I always will." He hung up slowly, the dial tone humming in his ear like a benediction. If you'd been standing there, in that quiet Memphis kitchen, watching the king lay the receiver down, you'd have seen something shift in him. A calm, a surrender, a silence that didn't feel like an ending, just the start of one last truth. The rain outside had stopped, but the phone line still hummed with faint static, like the air itself was recording every word. Rosetta didn't hang up right away. "You still there, Elvis?" "I'm here." His voice was low now, quieter, as if each word carried more weight than he could afford to lift. "You sound like you got something else you want to say," she murmured. He laughed softly, but it wasn't joy, it was pain disguised as charm. "You always could see through me, couldn't you?" "Always could," she said. Elvis sighed, leaning his head against the wall. "I been thinking about what comes after all this. The shows, the lights, the headlines. When it's gone, What's left? Rosetta's tone softened. What's left is the truth, baby. He went quiet for a moment. You could almost hear him gathering the courage to speak the words he'd never said to anyone. When I was a boy, he began slowly, Mama used to say the Lord gave me this voice to heal people. But I ain't sure I ever healed anyone. Not even myself. Rosetta said gently, You healed plenty, son. Every soul that ever felt lonely when you sang. He shook his head. You don't understand. They don't see me anymore. They see the jumpsuits, the gold. But not the man who still prays before every show. Then tell me, she said. What does that man pray for? Elvis closed his eyes. His next words came out broken, fragile. For peace. For forgiveness. For someone to see me the way Mama did, before the world took her boy and made him into something else. The line crackled softly. You could hear Rosetta's breath on the other end. Steady, patient. Elvis, she said. You know forgiveness don't come from applause or fame. Comes from tellin' the truth. Even when nobody's listenin'. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's why I called you. You don't want nothin' from me. Never did. Silence stretched again. Then he whispered, Sometimes I dream I'm back in Tupelo, barefoot sittin' on the porch with Mama. She's singin' peace in the valley. I try to join in, but no sound comes out. Rosetta said softly, Maybe that's the Lord tellin' you to listen for once. Elvis chuckled. Then his voice broke. Rosetta, I don't think I got much time left. Her tone sharpened. Don't you talk like that. I mean it, he said gently. The body's tired. The spirit's just ready. There was a pause. You could almost feel her heart break through the static. Elvis Aaron Presley, she said firmly. You don't get to decide when the Lord's done with you. He smiled. Maybe not. But I think he's waitin' for me to stop running. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked to 3:42 a.m. Charlie Hodge stirred in the next room. Half awake, unaware that the king was giving his final confession to a woman who'd once told him the one thing fame never could, that he was still worthy of grace. Rosetta, he said after a long silence, I want you to promise me something. What's that, baby? When I'm gone, tell folks I tried. Not that I failed. Not that I gave up. Just that I tried. Her voice wavered. You don't have to worry about that. The world already knows. Elvis laughed quietly. Maybe, but the world forgets easy. He shifted the phone against his ear and whispered, You ever wonder what heaven sounds like? She smiled through her tears. Like gospel on a Sunday mornin'. And maybe a little like you. He closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down his cheek. Then I reckon I ain't too far from home. The line went quiet again. The static faded to nothing. Rosetta whispered, Elvis. But he didn't answer. She heard only the soft sound of a man breathing, peaceful for the first time in years. Then faintly a hum. He was singing barely above a whisper. There will be peace in the valley for me. Rosetta pressed her hand to her heart. She knew what she was hearing wasn't just a song. It was a farewell. And when the line finally clicked dead, she whispered back, Amen. The house was silent. The call had ended. But hundreds of miles away, in a small Nashville home, another sound quietly continued. The soft spin of a reel-to-reel recorder. Unbeknownst to Elvis, Rosetta's husband, Reverend Joseph Brown, had a habit of recording his late-night interviews for his radio show Voices of Faith. The phone line was wired to the recorder in their study. That night, it captured everything. The static, the tremble in Elvis's voice, the long pauses that said more than words ever could. Rosetta didn't know. Not until morning. She came downstairs in her robe to find Joseph sitting at his desk, head bowed, the recorder still spinning. He didn't look up when she entered. Rosetta, he whispered. You better sit down. He pressed play. Her heart skipped. The sound filled the room. Elvis's soft drawl, confessing, Tell him I tried. Then came the final hum. There will be peace in the valley. By the time it ended, Rosetta was crying silently, her hands shaking over her chest. Joseph didn't say a word. He simply took the tape, labeled it private 1977 Elvis call, and locked it in a drawer. Some things, he said softly. Ain't meant for the world to hear. For 25 years, that drawer stayed closed. Through Rosetta's passing in 1993, through Joseph's retirement, through their daughter Lillian inheriting the house. Until one humid afternoon in 2002, while cleaning the attic, Lillian found the small metal box. Inside the tape, the label was still legible, the handwriting faded but unmistakable. She carried it downstairs, not knowing the weight she was holding. Her husband, a sound engineer, threaded the reel through an old TIAC player and pressed play. What they heard sent chills down their spines. That voice, fragile, human, stripped of all glamour, confessing. They remember the shows, but not the man. Lillian covered her mouth. Is this real? Her husband rewound, listened again. Then he noticed the timestamp written on the tape box. August 16th, 1977, 3:48 a.m. He froze. That was less than 30 minutes before Elvis was pronounced dead. Lillian sat in stunned silence. Mama never told anyone about this. Her husband whispered. Maybe she thought no one would believe her, but someone did. A local Memphis archivist later verified the tape's magnetic signature and matched the background hum to phone lines active in Graceland's area code that same year. The voice analysis left no doubt it was Elvis. Word spread quietly through collector circles, but RCA declined comment. The Presley estate issued a statement simply saying, there are still parts of his story that belong to him alone, yet the story refused to die. By 2004, whispers of the final call began appearing on fan forums. A few seconds of leaked audio surfaced. The moment when he says, "Tell him I finally found peace." Listeners described the clip as haunting, holy, heartbreaking. One fan wrote, "It doesn't sound like a goodbye. It sounds like he was already somewhere else." The full recording never aired publicly. It remained sealed in a private archive, its authenticity quietly acknowledged but never exploited. But that didn't matter, because for those who heard even a fragment, it was enough. Enough to know that the king's final words weren't about fame, or fear, or failure. They were about freedom. If you heard that voice, trembling but calm, confessing his soul across a crackling phone line, would you release it to the world? Or would you protect it like Rosetta did as something sacred? Whatever your answer, one truth would soon emerge. The man who sang to millions had spent his last breath singing to just one. And that single act of honesty would echo louder than any encore. The tape remained locked away for years, but its existence lingered like a rumor too heavy to die. By 2005, whispers of the final call reached journalists and sound historians. Most dismissed it as folklore, another myth in the kingdom of Elvis Presley. Then one man decided to test it. Dr. Walter Green, a forensic audio specialist in Nashville, received permission to analyze a digital copy from the Brown family. It took him 2 weeks of cross-referencing voice patterns, background noise, and static frequency. When he was done, his report was only 3 sentences long. Voice confirmed as Elvis Presley. Recording timestamp matches early morning August 16, 1977. Content authentic, unaltered. The news spread quietly among collectors before leaking to the local paper, The Commercial Appeal. The headline ran small but potent. Audio of Elvis's final moments believed found. Graceland's gates flooded with fans once again. But this time it wasn't to mourn, it was to listen. A temporary exhibit opened inside the Presley Archives wing in Memphis, titled The King's Last Words. In the center of the dimly lit room stood a pair of headphones beside a placard. Verified audio? August 16, 1977, 3:48 a.m. duration. 24 minutes. Only a few hundred people ever heard it in full. The reaction was always the same. Silence, tears, then whispered prayers. Because the voice on that tape didn't sound like a superstar. It sounded like a man finally laying down his crown. Elvis spoke of his mother, of forgiveness, of how the music had given him everything and taken everything in return. He said, "I tried to be what they wanted, but the boy from Tupelo still misses home." And near the end, his tone softened to a whisper. "Tell him I finally found peace." Then silence. Not the kind that feels empty, The kind that feels full, like the whole world had just exhaled. When the exhibit closed, the Presley estate placed the original reel in a sealed, climate-controlled vault. On its casing, written in black marker, were the words, "Do not duplicate. Do not erase." A small plaque was installed outside the vault, quoting his last line exactly as it was spoken. Fans still visit that spot. Some leave handwritten notes. Others stand quietly with their headphones, listening to the ghost of a voice that once shook the world. One fan wrote in the guest book, "It wasn't goodbye. It was a man saying, 'I'm finally okay.'" Even Priscilla, in a rare 2010 interview, acknowledged it gently. She said, "I think he finally found what he was always singing about. That's what made the recording sacred. It wasn't about the myth or the mystery. It was about closure." Because for decades, the story of Elvis had always ended in tragedy. Alone in a mansion, undone by fame. But the truth, now captured in fragile magnetic tape, told something different. It told of a man who spent his final moments not drowning in silence, but reaching out for grace. And he found it. If you stood in that dark Memphis room today, headphones pressed to your ears, hearing that gentle southern drawl fade into stillness, you'd feel it too. The sense that maybe, just maybe, the king didn't die haunted. He died home. They say voices fade with time, but some never do. Some linger, like echoes caught in the folds of memory, still alive each time someone presses play. Elvis Presley's final phone call was never meant for the world. It wasn't a performance or a farewell tour. It was something far rarer, a confession between two souls, one mortal, one eternal. And somehow it survived. Every August 16th, at 3:48 a.m., fans still gather outside Graceland. They hold candles, radios, and old cassette players. When the hour strikes, a few quiet notes of peace in the valley drift through the crowd. No one leads. No one speaks. It just begins softly, like the way he left. A hush follows. Even the wind seems to pause. Then, from somewhere among the crowd, a fan always whispers the same words. "Tell him I finally found peace." It's become a ritual now. An echo passed hand to hand, heart to heart. And maybe that's what Elvis's last call was always meant to be. Not a secret, but a signal. A message to anyone carrying their own ghosts. Because underneath the fame, the rhinestones, the gold records, he was never chasing perfection. He was searching for forgiveness. And he found it, not in front of 20,000 fans, but in the quiet crackle of a late-night phone line, speaking to someone who reminded him that even legends are human. That's why the story of the final call endures. Not because it's tragic, but because it's true to the soul. It reminds us that everyone, no matter how bright their stage, still yearns to be seen, not as who the world made them, but as who they truly are. Maybe that's why his music still feels alive today. Every lyric, every breath, carries a little piece of that night. A man letting go, finding peace, and sending one last message across time. He left the world with a sound, not a silence. And if you listen closely, even now you can still hear it. A faint hum, prayer in melody, a voice saying, "I'm home," because legends don't disappear when the lights go out. They echo forever. And Elvis Presley's echo is still calling. If the story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Were you alive when Elvis left us? Or did his music find you later? Tell us below. And tonight, wherever you are, take a moment to listen. Because sometimes, the quietest voices carry the loudest truths.